Okay, it's a go.
All right, thank you. So welcome everyone to the Monday, October 26, 2020 Planning Commission and Commission for Citizen Involvement meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Iris, would you please call roll?
Beckett?
Here.
Fisher?
Here.
Heat?
Here.
Pepe?
Here.
Semler?
Here.
Stewart?
Here.
Whitman?
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Iris. So first on our agenda is a citizen comment. This is regarding issues not on the agenda. Iris, I wasn't aware of anyone who would like to make a citizen comment tonight. Was there anybody that staff had identified as wishing to make a citizen comment?
No, I had no requests.
Next is on the agenda is Commission for Citizen Involvement, general updates. I didn't have anything tonight. I know, as we announced in our previous meeting, there's a lot of neighborhood association annual meetings occurring. So again, I encourage everybody in the neighborhood association to attend their neighborhood association's general meetings. So then next on the agenda was a public hearing. This is continued from October 12th, 2020. This is the Community Development Code and Comprehensive Plan Amendments to Subareas I and I-A of the Marylhurst Campus, LU 20-0016. Attorney Boone, is there anything that you would like to read or for us to read?
Sorry, my lighting here looks like it's terrible. Let's try something here. Yeah, well, that's kind of worse. The commission is, just as a reminder, the commission took oral and written testimony at its last meeting, and per request to continue the meeting to leave the record open for additional information by Carolyn Jones, the commission elected to do so, as it must, to this meeting, and elected to receive written testimony only. Any new evidence was to be submitted by October 19. Any rebuttal evidence to that new evidence was to be submitted by October 21st. So there's no oral testimony scheduled for the commission tonight. I think Jessica Numanoglu did a staff report, and yes, she's here if she wants to summarize the staff report and the written testimony that was received.
Thank you, Attorney Boone.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to start?
Sure, yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners. Again, I'm Jessica Numanoglu, the project planner for this proposal. And you should have received this staff memo on Friday, and it was also posted to the project webpage. As Mr. Boone pointed out, the record was left open for additional written testimony, which we received a number of exhibits on October 19th. Those included Exhibit F8, which was testimony by the applicant, Exhibits G12, G124 through G125, and also G214 through G217. During the rebuttal phase, we just received one exhibit, and that was from the applicant, and their rebuttal is in Exhibit F9. So I have a very brief presentation. I'm not going to go over the staff memo in detail, but I will say that the issues that were raised in the memo were very similar to the testimony that you received at the hearing, at the last public hearing. The issues related to traffic, there were a number of comments requesting that sub-area 1A not be included in the site, and then we had also a few comments that had suggested reducing the site to an even smaller area, just the area where the proposed dormitories would be removed. I am going to share my screen just so that we're all clear on where the sub areas are. And let me get this started. All right, hopefully everybody can see the screen okay. What the applicant has proposed in Exhibit F8, the applicant is requesting now to withdraw sub-area 1A from the site and in response to the testimony that was received. And just to be clear, the site originally included both sub-areas 1 and sub-areas 1A. And Subarea 1A is this very kind of odd, narrow-shaped area that I'm pointing to here on the map. And then Subarea 1 is just to the south of that. So the applicant proposes to remove Subarea 1A, so it would just include Subarea 1, which the original site was approximately 50 acres in size, and this reduced site would be about 40 acres in size. And as the applicant noted, the reason for including both of them originally was just for convenience. This is a zoning map of the site, and as you can see, the CI zone really includes, it includes both subareas 1A, which is about approximately right here, as well as Subarea 1. So it was really just included for convenience. These are all, by the way, these are all maps that were in the staff presentation at the last hearing. You can see the sensitive lands area here. This is approximately where Subarea 1A is. So it's really bound by sensitive lands. Staff has no objection to removing this from the subarea because it's really not feasibly developable anyway. And we do believe that even by just including, Subarea 1, there is a very well-defined boundary because you can see it includes all buildings that are basically south of this sensitive lands area, which can't be built on anyway. So it's a very well-defined area of the site, even though it is a subset of the CI zone. The applicant also submitted in their testimony, Exhibit F8, a revised traffic memo because they are reducing the site area. They were going to revise, or they revised their analysis. But it turns out the trip cap doesn't change because of the 15 buildings that were in both subareas 1A and 1, there's really only one building in Subarea 1A, and it was never actually included in the square footage that the original trip cap was based on. So that leaves the 14 buildings that are in Subarea 1. And the applicant found that, and they have a table in their revised traffic memo that breaks down all the square footages of the building showing how the trip cap was arrived at. And it doesn't change. The only thing that changes is that instead of applying to both Subarea 1A and 1, it would only apply to Subarea 1. The applicant also submitted, I'm going to stop sharing here. They also submitted a revised draft code amendments, and staff has reviewed that and confirmed that with the revised amendments that are in Exhibit F8, it does remove all amendments that had been associated with Subarea 1A. None of the comments that we received cited any applicable comp plan or policies or criteria that the proposed code amendments didn't comply with, or even cited any criteria or policies. And staff finds that the removal of Subarea 1A has no effect on compliance with any of the applicable policies or criteria. There are code standards in effect currently or proposed as part of these amendments that would address all of the policies that were discussed in the original staff report. There's design review standards that are going to be applicable to future multifamily. We have sensitive lands protections already that would still apply. Open space standards, landscaping standards, height setbacks, all of those things are addressed by the code amendments or that are already existing in the code. So the staff recommendation hasn't changed. The staff still recommends approval of the revised draft comprehensive plan and community development code amendments by removing Subarea 1A. And I do want to make a small correction from the staff report. On page 3 of the staff report, under the staff recommendation, it said that staff recommends approval of the revised draft code amendments, but unfortunately, I said it was for removing Subarea 1 instead of Subarea 1A, so I apologize for that error, but it is just removing Subarea 1A. If you do have any questions, as Mr. Boone pointed out, we aren't taking any additional oral testimony today, but if you have specific questions about traffic during your deliberations or the traffic memo, Will Farley, our traffic engineer, is here and available to answer questions, as am I. And that concludes my presentation, if you have any questions.
Oh, thank you. Commissioners, any questions for staff? Commissioner Fisher?
I have a question. I'm not sure it's relevant, and if I'm not, I'm sure Attorney Boone will let me know. If this is all concentrated affordable housing, does that run afoul, or could it run afoul of eventually what will happen with 201? Because it almost seems like, that's going to be the poor section of Lake Oswego. Is there a danger of that happening is there any conflict between what they're proposing and what potentially is coming down the pike? Or should I save that for Eric when he reports?
Oh, this is Scott, if you have questions relevant to the rezoning application, this would be the time to have them make sure that they're addressed. I think your question, Commissioner Fisher, was how does this comp plan and zone change affect or maybe relate to the city's compliance with House Bill 2001? Is that it?
Yeah, that's
okay. It doesn't apply and it doesn't relate really at all because the code amendments here pertain to multifamily housing, although, House Bill 2001 does address some very small forms of multifamily housing, quadplexes and triplexes. What's envisioned here and what the code would allow, and actually what the affordable housing requirements would obligate on the site are larger multifamily projects, at least 20 units. I believe that's what the affordable housing criteria call for. So again, House Bill 2001, middle housing, it pertains to quadplexes and smaller townhomes, cottage cluster development, and what's proposed here is a form of multifamily housing that's much larger in scale.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, that's exactly what I was confused about, because if this is a large development and Lake Oswego can turn around and say, look, we have this in our inventory, is there a danger that we're violating the intent of 201 in that they want to break up traditional segregation patterns? And is this segregating poor people to an area, or lower income people to an area? And does that violate the spirit? And I'm not sure.
Yeah, so just to add on to that thought, HB 2001 applies to single zones that allow single family housing. Okay. And so this campus is zoned campus institutional, doesn't allow single family housing. So in that sense, it wouldn't be, it doesn't really relate to the bill, but if you're concerned about a concentration of affordable housing, currently, I mean, you could find that it's actually dispersing affordable housing more so than we have today, because the two multifamily developments that currently exist in the city that are publicly assisted projects or subsidized are both in Lake Grove. And this is on the opposite side of the community. And it's also very close to large lot single family homes and other lower density forms of housing within walking distance, in fact. So that would be I don't know if anyone, Jessica or Evan, would have anything to add, but that's my take on it.
Thank you.
I mean, that's all factually correct, but not a criteria. So I think you're, as you pointed out, it's not a statutory requirement nor a comp plan analysis. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Commissioner Stewart, question?
Yes. I think I recall reading at least a couple of letters in the recent issue of revised staff report that spoke to concerns with substandard streets and those sorts of improvements. My assumption is with any development application that would happen, those sorts of things would be addressed at that time. Is that correct?
Yeah, the streets and sidewalks standard really refers to public streets, which we know that Highway 43 is already, has sidewalks and transit, and it's 4 lanes, and it has signalized intersections. On-site circulation is also addressed. We have a standard, and it really is more to do with fire access, and then obviously pedestrian circulation. But yeah, that would be addressed as part of the application. Certainly if you do multifamily, the on-site circulation standard as well as the street standards both would apply to such development.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Beckett.
I have a comment. Yes, one of the things we'll be dealing with later is the whole desire for more affordable housing. The sisters with this proposal are proposing a significant chunk of affordable housing in an area that causes very little conflict with neighbors. To put in affordable housing and multiple family housing requires real estate that is not generally available in Lake Oswego. This is a place where it is. And so it's an ideal opportunity that the sisters have provided us to allow, we can't create it, but we allow for affordable housing here. It also supports the possibility for approximately 400 employees employed over in Mary's Wood to live nearby to their work.
Commissioner Beckett, just a point of order. We're not in deliberations right now, but if you have questions that specifically relate to the proposal and concerns on how it is compliant or not compliant with the comprehensive plan, the criteria, or the policies, that would be helpful. But we'll move into deliberations in a little bit.
Okay, I'll save my further remarks till then. I can
Thank
even
you.
repeat myself.
Commissioners, other questions? Again, focused on questions related to the comprehensive plan, criteria, or policies, and how this proposal, may or may not adhere to them. I don't see any.
Then, Mr. Chair, am I on? Yeah, Mr. Chair, before closing the public hearing, I would ask the applicant, and I believe Debbie Creek, something like that, is the applicant's representative, planning representative is on. The question is whether the applicant wishes to submit an opportunity to submit to submit final written argument in support of the application. That information would be considered part of the record, but would not include any new evidence. So I would ask the applicant's representative, do they wish to submit final written argument, which would delay the commission's deliberation and decision on the application until the next meeting? Or do you want the commission to deliberate and decide the case now based upon the evidence and the argument that you've received?
Yeah, thank you. We would like to move on to deliberation right now. We're the only people that submitted a rebuttal, so I don't believe there's more to be said at this point. Thank you.
All right, just for the record then. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You may now proceed to deliberation.
All right. Question on our process, Attorney Boone. Would it be proper to make a motion and then have discussion on the motion for the deliberation, or just open to deliberations?
The chair could do it either way. Typically what the DRC does, because they do a lot of quasi-judicial, is they'll just go from commissioner to commissioner, what are the issues that each commissioner has, then kind of talk through the issues, and then kind of by identification of the issues kind of come up with a motion.
Sure.
You can alternatively, you could do a motion and then have people talk about it.
Okay. So we'll do it the latter. Commissioners wishing to make comments. Maybe first I'll go back to Commissioner Beckett since now we're in deliberation. So if you'd like to kind of restate or summarize the comments you were making earlier, you may do so now.
Okay, I'll be glad to. The city has been immersed in the idea that we need more affordable housing, and I certainly agree with that. This is a perfect opportunity to allow for it. We can't create it, we don't provide it, but we allow the change of the zoning that's been applied for so that the sisters can in fact install affordable housing if they can get that cleared through the commission at a later point. But it opens up possibilities that are difficult to find in Lake Oswego or there is so little real estate that isn't already developed. So this, I think, with the change that was made of eliminating area 1A from consideration, that removes one of the points that so many letters were received objecting to. 1A is directly adjacent to Mary's Wood, and Mary's Woods is where a lot of the objections came from, specifically with regard to including 1A in it. So I think one of the chief obstacles to getting concurrence on going ahead with this has now been removed and makes it easy for us to come to a conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Commissioner Beckett. Commissioners, other comments? Commissioner Stewart?
Hey, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Commissioner Whitman, I'll recognize you, and then I'll come back to you, Commissioner Stewart. Sorry. Go ahead, Commissioner Whitman.
I was just going to say that I think both applicant and staff have done an excellent job of outlining this, or detailing, I should say, this whole proposal. And I have personally just admire the sisters for going the route they're going, creating affordable housing, as previous commissioner just stated, where there's very little available and clearly a need, demonstrably a need for it. So I admire their willingness to leave money on the table and move ahead in this process.
Thank you, Commissioner Whitman. Commissioner Stewart?
So I feel like I'm going to go ahead and also, it sounds like, support this proposal in the research that I've done, and being mindful that you know, the development goals and objectives that are being proposed today, you know, do not necessarily guarantee that, you know, that the project will be sited at the exact location that we're talking about. However, I do realize that the campus has, you know, an array of, I think we said 14 buildings plus or minus, you know, in varying degrees of condition. And I think we all know and recognize that the historic buildings there, I think there's 5 of them, are in pretty good shape. And then there are others. I'm thinking of a couple back near the dormitories just to the north there that, you know, maybe they're not as in good shape, and maybe someday those 2 could be redeveloped. And so everybody should understand that the potential is there for that to happen. However, I think that just the way the historic buildings are sited on campus and everything, I think that change can be made and still preserve the integrity of what's there. There was a comment made about height, and there was some concern. I heard a little bit about that. In my observations, the average height of the buildings on campus seem to be, you know, in the 2 to 3 story range. I know that the largest building is actually a 4-story building on the east side. I know it steps down on the site, and so from the front it doesn't seem as tall, but it's actually, there is a 4-story building on the campus, so there is precedent for, you know, allowing, I think, a 45-foot height limit. What else? I think the campus setting is a great opportunity for housing. It's a beautiful scenic location, and I think it would be you know, a good place to live. So those are my comments, and that's why I think I'm in favor of this. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Stewart. Commissioners, any other comments? Vice Chair Pape?
While I'm not in total opposition of what the sisters are wanting to do as far as either tear down buildings and construct affordable housing, what my concern is lies specifically with the rezoning of the entire parcel albeit subtracting out 1A as well as the cemetery, which then brings it down to a total of roughly 40 acres, if my memory serves me right in the readings that we've had. Everything that the traffic reports point to is specifically with just the building of the affordable housing. And if that being said, there's also nothing that will prevent them, if the entire 40 acres is rezoned, from building additional buildings, whether it's residential or commercial. And I think based on what is being asked right now, and with all of the reports that have been provided and the studies pointing specifically to the development of the 75 to 100 unit affordable housing, I think the area that should be rezoned should be specific just to that area. And that's what I'm having a real struggle with, as far as giving the green light to have all of the 40 acres completely rezoned, or just the specific area that they're wanting to develop.
Thank you, Vice Chair Pape. Commissioner Simler.
I share Vice Chair Pape's concern in terms of the full development, and I know that the intention right now is to do the one development with the number of units that they're proposing, but there's also not a cap to what they want to build or potentially build in the future. And I think that's my one sticking point. It sounds like from a traffic standpoint that it's been pretty well documented from what had existed there in terms of traffic flow when it was a full-blown campus and running at 100%. And so I don't see any issue with, adding multifamily and then fully fleshing out the spaces that they have now for occupancy. But yeah, I guess since there is no limit on the development, that they could get in the door with this as multifamily, low income, and be helping the community. But if they get in a financial pinch later down the line, that there's no telling what they can do. They can essentially develop freely as they'd like.
Thank you, Commissioner Simler. Commissioner Fisher.
Can we ask Attorney Boone, can we modify any of this to take care of Commissioner Pape and Semler's concerns? Or are we
your role here is to make a recommendation to the city council on the application you have before you. So if you want to propose alterations, limitations of the zone text language, you may do so.
Commissioners, just point of clarification, there are really three controls on the build out or reuse of this campus. One is the trip cap that the applicant has proposed and that the city finds it meets the criteria. The second are the sensitive lands districts that form the perimeter of the site that Jessica described. And the third are the historic landmarks. Reuse of those buildings is going to require special treatment to maintain the integrity. So in addition to the development standards that any development would have to comply with in the code, you do have those three controls that are operating. So I just want to make sure everyone has all the facts, that's all.
Thank you, Director Siegel. Any more comments, Commissioner Stewart?
I'm a little concerned about putting too much constraint on or limitations on this, for the simple reason that the flip side, as I understand it, is the care and maintenance of this campus is also, I imagine, is somewhat of a financial burden, particularly with not all of the buildings being used or usable. Now I'm just supposing that. I don't know if that is entirely the case or not, but so I mean, if you walk around the campus, it's clear that there's certain locations that in my opinion at least, I believe could be viable potential sites like we're discussing. But then there's other places that I think clearly would not be. So, assuming that the integrity of the campus is maintained, that only leaves about a handful of sites where you could actually redevelop. And my assumption is as part of the master plan and the way the code is written, that the quote unquote integrity of the campus would be maintained. So you couldn't just kind of carte blanche build a bunch of housing complexes on it.
Thank you, Commissioner Stewart. Commissioner Simler?
I'm just wondering, maybe this is a question for Scott and Attorney Boone, but is there any limitation for them to demo the buildings, the existing buildings that don't have landmark status? Because that's what they're proposing for the dormitories, right? To make it a usable site to build these multifamily complex, or a multifamily complex. Right now, there's no limitation to them tearing any other building other than the landmarks down, correct?
Not any regulatory limitation. I mean, the market will drive that or not drive that.
And I would add to Scott's, I mean, that is correct. So if there's non-historic buildings that they wanted to tear down, they could do that today. The multifamily is not the driver. They could do it to put an office building. They could do it to put congregate care facility. Those are already permitted outright. So if the market drove that, then yes, they could do that today elsewhere on the campus.
Sure. I guess what I'm getting at is they're not necessarily boxed in to the one space that they're planning on demoing the existing building. They could demo 2/3 of the site right now and propose that there's any type of building type, whether it's commercial, multifamily, institutional, anything there. But they have some flexibility in pushing forward with future new development. I guess that's my question and point.
As the code amendments are proposed now, yes. If you were to limit the multifamily, then of course that use would be constrained to just a smaller subset. But as the code amendments are proposed right now, no, they could do it in any suitable location.
And one thing I'd add, I don't want to belabor this, but if I don't, Evan will, that your recommendation ultimately has to address the comprehensive plan, the applicable policies and criteria. And so any recommendation that would change the geography, you would need to relate that to a comp plan policy to really inform and advise the council as to the reasons for your decision. Just wanted to give a heads up.
I second that. So to supplement my prior remark, you can modify the proposal, but in doing so, I mean, your question is whether the current proposal meets all the applicable criteria. Okay? If you find it does not, but that a lesser version of it would, that's why you would modify. If a modification is necessary in order to make it compliant with the comp plan policies, you may do so. And of course, you'd want to explain to the council why you think a modification is appropriate to address the comp plan policies.
Thank you, Attorney Boone and Director Siegel. Vice Chair Pape, did you have another comment? Oh, sorry, Vice Chair Pape, you're on mute.
Sorry, couldn't get my mouse over quick enough. I know that the testimony that the applicant has provided, I take that at face value, and I take that what they've said to be what their intentions are. But there's nothing that says tomorrow, if this zone change happens, that property doesn't sell. And I know that again, I believe what the nuns are saying, that they have no intentions whatsoever of selling the property. But as we also heard from the applicant, that their organization size is definitely dwindling. And my concern is, if we open this up and we have the full entire 40 acres rezoned, it will without question provide a massive increase in value to that the the Marylhurst Commons. Might not be tomorrow, but I just want to be very careful of what we're about to go forward with if we open it up and provide rezoning for the entire 40-acre parcel, what that could mean in 5 years from now or 10 years from now. And that's where I'm having a really hard time with coming to the conclusion that that they need all of that 40 acres and not 5 or 10 or 3 acres for the specific buildings that they're wanting to build.
Thank you, Vice Chair Pepe. I guess I'll give my thoughts. The concerns I primarily had was the height. I was concerned about the 40-foot, 45-foot height. But as staff had pointed out, that is the code and the current height. So I didn't have any policy criteria concerns related to the height. The other big one that I was originally concerned about too was traffic. Potentially that could have an impact, but again, I think the trip cap that was put in place, staff and the others have basically in the state even recognized that the trip cap would basically resolve any concern with the traffic impacts. So again, I thought all the criteria and policies were met by putting the trip cap in place. And then the other concern is kind of what I think some of the other commissioners have been echoing here is just the size. But I feel pretty comfortable that the plan that's submitted, in the statements that, the target is 75 to 100 multifamily units, that definitely fits within the plan and meets all the criteria. So I would be in favor of it, and I'd be willing to make a motion for approval of LU 16, or excuse me, 20-0016, based on the findings, reasons, and conclusions in the staff report and of this commission and its deliberations, subject to no additional conditions. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Stewart seconds. Discussion on the motion?
Yes, I have a question on that.
Sure, Commissioner Beckett.
Does your motion include the changes that were drafted, removing 1A from the plan?
A good question, Commissioner Stewart. I think it's good clarification. So yes, the motion is to accept the removal of the 1A section of the plan.
Good, because that was my only major objection to proceeding.
Thank you for that clarification, Commissioner Beckett. That was one of my concerns too, and I echo that with the removal of 1A addressed a lot of the concern I had. Commissioner Fisher, yes.
Can I ask Commissioner Pape and Semler, you heard Attorney Boone say that we could modify it if you had some policy or rule that we could point to for the city. Do you have any suggestions on that?
I don't have a specific or know of a specific policy or rule that we could attach to this in order to reduce the applicant's request down from 40 to 3 or 5 or 10. I don't have that at the ready. So.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. Either do I.
Commissioner Stewart?
A quick question. Circling back to the traffic study and the traffic counts. At our last meeting, there was a number quoted as to what portion of the traffic that a 75 to 100 unit multifamily project would consume. Could somebody remind me what that is?
Traffic Engineer Farley, is that a question that you may be able to answer?
I don't have the document in front of me, but the cap was 357, and I think the apartments were less than 50 of that.
So they're
around 50 trips.
50 of 350. Okay, so potentially 700 apartment units could consume the entire traffic count. Is that
An apartment is, yeah,
somewhat
is about-
accurate?
One apartment is about 0.65 trips, if I recall. I don't have the number in front of me.
So you could build a few more sites under that trip count, assuming that you still had some office use and everything. So, you know, we're not talking about a lot more housing necessarily.
Thank you, Commissioner Stewart. Commissioners, any further discussion on the motion? Not. Iris, would you call the roll?
Certainly. Beckett,
Aye.
Fisher,
Aye.
Heap,
Yes.
Pepe,
I'm sorry, my Wi-Fi went down. Are we voting on?
Yeah, there was a motion to approve with the understanding that the 1A would be not included in the plan. And then the rest of the
Right, based
staff
on-
report.
yeah. Okay,
pardon? So, yes?
so no.
Okay. Simler,
No.
Stewart,
Yes.
Whitman, Commissioner Whitman,
Yes, yes, yes.
thank you.
All right, so the motion is approved.
This is a tentative decision by the commission and written findings we brought back to the commission at its next meeting on Monday, November 9 at 6:30.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is other business. This is House Bills 2001 and 2003, PP 19-0008. Public comment is accepted. Senior Planner Olson, would you like to give us an update?
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Chair Heap. As the Commission likely noticed, this month I thought it was wise to issue 2 updates on HB 2001 and 2003 and the rulemaking going on at the state level regarding those 2 bills. So the reason I did that is because the final hearing for the likely adoption of rulemaking, minimum compliance and model code requirements is expected at the next hearing of the Land Conservation and Development Commission on November 12th and 13th. So this will be basically the last time to submit a comment that could be considered for that record at the hearing. As you may or may not have noticed in the staff report, I wanted to keep you all apprised of any potential changes to the proposed minimum compliance or model code prior to that, the new draft being issued for the hearing at LCEC, the revised draft. I did not see a final version of that, but I tried to include, redlined version comments of the changes that they are considering and describe some of those. There aren't a huge amount of substantive changes that, are more than technical in nature at this point that they're discussing. I think the most substantive potential change is the potential ability to sort of carve out from the performance metric calculation areas that may be at risk of demolition of existing affordable units or gentrification, displacement, those types of issues. So that's probably the biggest change that has been discussed. And yeah, I guess, so I wanted to open this up for, comments from the commission. And I also wanted to, while I'm here, provide you with a brief update on the status of the request for proposals that we issued for work to help us develop some deliverables and do some research related to the implementation of House Bill 2001. And just to give you an update on that, the solicitation has now concluded for the consultant that will be helping us out for that work. We sent out the notices of intent to award, and we have selected Cascadia Partners as our as the consultant that we'll be moving forward with. There were different proposals, but they will be the planning consultant, the lead, and then there will be 2 architectural sub-consultants working with them, Walker Macy and Lawrence Kamar Associates. So just kind of an update on that. Also, we're going to begin negotiating the contract and some details on scope fairly soon. So we'll be picking up the work with the consultant in the next month or two, and we will start to see the results of that starting in spring of 2021, spring of next year. And that's when I will likely be back at the Planning Commission to talk about the results of some of that work that we were doing with the consultant. So now that we've sort of gone over that, I guess I'll open it up to questions or any direction that you want to provide regarding rulemaking for House Bill 2001 and 2003.
Right. Thank you, Planner Olson. One question, Iris, was there anybody that submitted a request to provide comment tonight?
No.
Okay, so I guess we only have questions from commissioners. So commissioners, questions for Senior Planner Olson? I don't see any. There's Commissioner Stewart. Sorry, I didn't see you. And Commissioner Pickett will come to you next. I recognize Commissioner Stewart first. Sorry, Commissioner Stewart, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I saw something in the memo, and I can't recall which group was discussed, but there was a comment or a concern raised about the possibility of middle housing once implemented could potentially displace existing affordable housing, and there's concern that opening up possibilities for creating middle housing will displace existing affordable housing. Has the city begun or thought about any sort of ways to discourage this, or is there such a path, or I'm curious if there's been any discussion about that?
This is still pretty, again, this is very late breaking. It's all kind of coming really quickly out of the state at this point. So in terms of the gentrification conversation and the performance metric approach, we have not discussed, what we could be doing within the city. I think that's the topic that I want to sort of highlight, though, with the staff report is say that, we do have this concern in Lake Oswego about the potential demolition of existing affordable homes. There are a number of other sort of policies and things that are happening to prevent demolitions. Demolition tax, for instance, is a pretty, pretty strong tool, I think, to prevent demolitions. But in terms of the way that HB 2001 is implemented, there may be opportunities to, again, sort of carve out or whittle away certain areas where we think there might be existing affordable units that might be vulnerable to displacement. So that's kind of how it would look in Lake Oswego for this implementation. In terms of other more sort of immediate measures, I think there are other efforts going on as well then.
And Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I recall, the scope of work for the consultant allows for us to explore that subject and to look at areas or to look at the effect of introducing middle housing and trying to help us steer away from areas where it would have a disparate impact on lower income households.
Yeah, I think that's a very specific and very above ground intent of this bill to prevent that type of outcome. And I think that there are concerns that it might be used to by certain jurisdictions to just get out of trying to sort of get out of middle housing requirements generally, I suppose. But I think that there is, regardless, an opportunity for that to be. I think that it's likely that it will be included in what's adopted by the LCDC. So that might be something that, using the parameters that they've set forward with that, that we could explore here in the city as we move forward, and particularly with some of the work that the consultant will be helping us do in a couple months that will follow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Beckett, you had a question?
Yes. Beginning about more than 40 years ago, perhaps closer to 50, I'm not sure which, Mountain Park came together as a planned community. And it has a lot of multifamily housing in it as part of its plan. It has a community center, a swimming pool. It's been ranked as one of the best and most forward-looking in the entire country. So I would like to see, does this rule where they start applying single family to, or duplexes to 80% of the lots and triplexes to 70% of the lot and quadplexes to 60% of the lot, you know the formula. Does that apply in the Mountain Park area? And also, are there other planned community areas within Lake Oswego that should be exempted, like Mountain Park should be exempted?
So in terms of whether or not it would apply within Mountain Park, as you were mentioning, there is multifamily included in Mountain Park as well as single family perhaps in certain areas. So, I'm not sure exactly, how it would impact that existing development. This is a bill that is meant to apply to existing single family residential zones. So a lot of what we know of Mountain Park would not comply with that sort of idea or that zoning necessarily, but it doesn't mean it's not there. In terms of the master plan communities, though, the ability to plan in that way moving forward and have those types of developments, they did specifically include some changes based on some input from, I believe it was the city of Wilsonville primarily. But there was some concern that they had some very well liked and appreciated master plan communities, similar to what you were talking about, Commissioner Beckett. And they were saying that, there is single family zoning in there. And so are you saying that we can't, develop this type of community in the future, even though we do have multifamily housing set aside and the overall density of the development is still quite high? So, I think just the easiest way to explain the likely regulations related to master plan communities is that there will be a potential for there to be single family quote unquote zoning within a master plan community. However, they will have to meet certain minimum density requirements on the whole. So it would have to be something like 15 units per acre or something of that nature as a net sort of density that would be balanced out. If there was some single family homes, it would be balanced out by other more intensive multifamily or middle housing types of developments. So it would provide an opportunity for master plan communities in the future, but there would be that sort of cap on, or a limitation on the density, and it couldn't be all single family.
A related question: right next door to Mountain Park is the neighborhood called Condoleezza, and can Condoleezza be combined with Mountain Park when it comes to applying the percentages? Because Condoleezza is entirely multifamily structures, so that would be 100% there. Add that to already diverse structures in Mountain Park and perhaps other close by neighborhoods. It might prevent this HB 2001 from upsetting even more of Lake Oswego's history and ambience.
Yeah, I just want to remind folks that, again, this would just apply in single family residential zones, and it would only, the new master plan communities would not be able to include existing master plan communities under this. I think it would have to be wholly new created master plan community. I don't think you'd be able to sort of attach it to another one necessarily right now.
Well, there is one master plan community that consists of 40 residences. It's all built out and there is no vacant spot. Is it going to apply to a master plan community of that type?
Again, it really, the requirements are about single family residential zones, and most of the master plan communities that you're referring to are multifamily generally. I think that there are certainly master plan communities in single family zones, however, in the city, a good amount of them. And, in terms of modifying the zoning, it could be the case that, that these are not areas where we're able to take on additional housing. If we, do the sort of percentage calculation and we say, this doesn't this won't work for new middle housing or something of that nature. But you know, it's a fine grained analysis that we'll have to take essentially to the entire city. There will be areas where there are existing master plan communities where there might you know, still be a requirement to adopt zoning that would allow middle housing in that area. So when I'm talking about master plan communities, it's really about newly created master plan communities where those regulations would apply. They wouldn't sort of, existing master plan communities would not be able to be carved out of the sort of denominator for middle housing, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Commissioner Stewart, did you have a question?
No, I was just going to add a little bit to the conversation. Mountain Park does have certain areas that are zone single family, but I think, you know, collectively its total density is probably among the highest in the state. But that's not to say that, you know, those. So I guess from what I understand, the way the House Bill 2001 is being considered is even those areas that are zoned as single family within Mountain Park would probably be, you know, eligible, if you will, you know, for middle housing, as I understand, unless there is some sort of exemption.
Yeah, that is correct, Commissioner Stewart, that the you know, the master planned community regulations that they're proposing currently would only apply to either ones that are already in the pipeline being proposed like now, or are going to be proposed after the adoption of the law, or of the rulemaking, rather, the requirements.
Eric,
Dr. Siegel?
Yeah, maybe what we need to do is look into this a little bit further, but there is that other performance standard option that's still being developed. And I think that does not allow a community to look retrospectively at development patterns and zoning. And if you know, just de facto, we have the mix of middle housing in a single family zone neighborhood that would, you know, substantially comply with the bill, then we can say, you know, for that area or that zone, we have the regulations in place. You know, as demonstrated by past development patterns. I mean, all of this is very abstract still. It hasn't been adopted yet, but I think that wasn't that the direction they were trying to move in terms of a performance option.
Yeah, so I guess I'm trying to specify that you couldn't like carve a master plan community out of the denominator for the performance metric approach, but you could, you know, certainly the single family and sort of total single family land and the existing middle housing and land that are just areas that are zoned for middle housing could also go towards the, you know, the denominator of that. So it's not as though they won't be considered in the calculation. It's just, you know, there are different density standards that could be applied for a new master plan community. I think that's the simplest way to say it.
Thank you. Commissioner Sumler, you had a question or comment?
I was just wondering, have existing covenants been taken off the table in terms of regulating or basically squashing House Bill 2001 for any existing developments that have a covenant that would restrict any more than one unit on a single tract or single parcel? Is that still in play, or has that been taken off the table?
So they, the scope of the rulemaking has not allowed them to take those covenants away or do anything to negate them. So covenants that existed prior to House Bill 2001 being adopted will continue to apply, and that's something that I think, yeah, that we knew from the start. So yeah, that is sort of not contingent on this rulemaking, but you know, it still gets brought up quite a bit, and people are still concerned about it.
Gotcha. Commissioner Sumler, just maybe a question for you. Was that kind of just a general question, or is there something that maybe you have heard that you know, indicated that the covenants would be removed?
No, I haven't. That was just a general question, and I think, you know, I don't know the ins and outs of Mountain Park, but I would assume that there'd be some sort of covenant as part of the. Yeah. So, and I think this is something that we had brought up previously in other meetings was, you know, are there areas within the city that can literally be eliminated from middle housing right now because of existing covenants, and unless, you know, the majority of the residents vote that, House Bill 2001, or to allow more than a single unit on a single parcel, that we could just rule areas out. So I was just making sure that that's still in play.
I will clarify in terms of ruling areas out. That I think that it will still be necessary to adopt middle housing or zoning that allows middle housing within areas that have covenants. It's simply that the zoning can't negate those covenants. And I think a lot of people have been concerned that this might be creating a quote unquote false stock of land that could be developed as middle housing. Based on sort of that performance metric idea of 70% of blocks would have triplexes that we could construct on them. That would not include covenants in that calculation.
I guess my other question, I've just been talking about House Bill 2001 with neighbors and some colleagues and stuff, and everyone that I speak to is like, oh, that seems like a great idea, but I'd never want a duplex or triplex or quadplex right next to my own home. And, it's like not in my backyard. And I'm just wondering is there a mechanism or a pathway that the city sees for, neighborhood associations or people within the city, kind of being upset about these level of density, properties going in adjacent if it's demoed or something like that. I mean, obviously it would be the law and the city can just point to the law, but that doesn't mean that people are going to stop being upset about it. And I don't know, maybe that's a silly question, but
it's
just wondering about it.
Yeah, still unclear how folks will react, but I think it's very likely that there will be a lot of folks that aren't excited to have the potential for middle housing next to them. So, we are bound to state requirements. There are, not only is there this idea that, a certain percentage of lots that are zoned for single family would have to allow different types of middle housing, but there is within the performance metric approach a requirement to make sure it's kind of evenly distributed as well within different census block groups. So, I guess that at least will ensure that nobody's really being singled out. No neighborhood is really getting the brunt of the impacts more than others, at least theoretically. But yeah, it's certainly a likely expectation, or it's an expectation I think is likely to occur.
Yeah, and I think in terms of neighborhood input and public involvement, the way that the work is scoped and the plan that Eric's laid out, as you may recall, involves very intensive study of each neighborhood. And then so to help inform the community dialogue that will follow, because when we have that dialogue, we want it to be constructive, we want it to be solution oriented, and there's going to be some there's going to be a lot of questions about what are the minimum requirements, are we really required to do this? And we want you to be able to go in well positioned to say, we know what the minimum requirements are, and we know that the council direction is to not impact, not have this be any more intrusive than it really has to be. And we're a city with a strong tradition of planning and urban design and codification of community values. So that's really how we're approaching it. And the public involvement at the neighborhood scale, we would like to see that be very well informed, very robust, and so we're not we're not just taking what the state's telling us. We're not defaulting to the model code, but we're coming up with a work product that's really tailored to Lake Oswego with your guidance.
And I do think that the consultant that we have on board now is really somebody that can help us get there, and has a sort of mindset and approach that I think will really go along with the approach that we're going to take here. So, in terms of at least obviously the displacement issue that we've talked about before, but also the preservation of existing patterns of neighborhood character, and talking to folks. There will be a sort of one engagement piece that will allow folks from different neighborhoods to talk about physical characteristics of their neighborhood that they appreciate and that they would want to maintain, and sort of even mapping exercises where they could point to something in the neighborhood and say, I like this and this is why. And so there's a lot of opportunities for folks to make positive comments and sort of talk about the things they enjoy about their neighborhood, and for us to focus on that as we move forward with the outreach.
I'll make another point.
Commissioner Beckett, go ahead.
Yes, the there's been no discussion of this yet. The adding of new properties, new homes to lots that already have single family is part of what's being required. But there are some places where that just isn't safe or practical. If those of you who have been here long enough remember 1996 with the floods and the rising of the lake level that caused water to flow over the top of the bridge across Bryant Woods and so on. So lakefront properties are a special case, I hope. And let me give you some numbers. Oswego lakefront, there are 698 single-family residences. On the Tualatin River, there are 59 single-family residences. On the Willamette River, there are 49 single-family residences, and all of that is within Lake Oswego. These homes deserve some protection against, or I should say the properties deserve some limits and protections about squeezing too much on them that might be at risk the next time we have a 1996 flooding situation.
Commissioner Beckett, I'll just point out that, on that note, there is the ability in our sort of implementation approach to House Bill 2001 to actually carve out areas that are protected under statewide planning goals. So that would include, I think, all of the areas that you mentioned, basically anywhere where there's a riparian area. The Willamette River Greenway is one of those areas. There are setbacks for existing resource protection areas that exist currently in the code, but there is additional opportunities to regulate the location of what they call that higher middle housing, so above duplexes. There is the ability within what's been proposed to regulate the location of that type of housing in areas protected by statewide planning goals. So those natural areas and waterways that you're referring to.
Thank you. Vice Chair Pepe, you had a comment or question?
Yeah, question for Eric. Has there, we've been continuously focusing on city. Now within the city of Lake Oswego's boundaries, there are definitely large areas of unincorporated lands that are basically still in Clackamas County. There's also within Multnomah County, for instance, Dunthorpe being unincorporated, at least I believe, in unincorporated Multnomah County. What do these House bills do as far as those parcels of land?
So I can look into the specifics of this for you, but my understanding is that it would not apply to unincorporated areas within a city. So that's there might be some comprehensive plan work that would sort of be taking place in sort of mapping designations in advance, but that at least for areas without services and things of that nature, there are unincorporated areas rather that do have services, I suppose, but that in general, areas that do not have sufficient services currently would not, and it depends on kind of the breakdown, right? So there's constrained infrastructure and there's infrastructure, there's other sort of types of infrastructure deficiencies. So it kind of depends on if it's deficient or constrained infrastructure, I suppose, but generally the lack of infrastructure in unincorporated areas would mean that we would not necessarily have to allow middle housing in those areas.
So if they had, like the Dunthorpe area, if they had, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just a little bit more context. So overlaying all of what Eric just described, the city and Clackamas County have an intergovernmental agreement that applies to the unincorporated areas, the urban services boundary. And it requires, there are certain triggers for when properties must annex to the city and receive services from the city, one of which is multifamily housing. So it is possible today to develop or redevelop a single family home on an unincorporated lot without connecting to city sewer. In fact, if it's not legally or physically feasible to connect to city sewer, there's an allowance for a home to be built on a septic system, for example. However, to go beyond that and to develop multifamily housing or commercial development in that unincorporated area, our IGA with Clackamas County requires that they connect to sewer. Now, it may be that they don't connect to city sewer. They may be connecting to Washington County Clean Water Services District, which provides sewer service in the Lake Forest neighborhood, for example. But they are required by the IGA to annex to the city. So we have that lever. It doesn't mean that they're, I mean, what it does in effect is that it ensures that there's adequate infrastructure for whatever level of development that they're going to put in. And if it is middle housing, then it would pertain to that. So I guess what I'm saying is we don't know all the answers to this yet, but we think, and we'll look into this further, that there isn't really an ability to develop middle housing in the unincorporated portions of our urban services boundary, without connecting to the services and annexing. That's a good question. I should look into that.
Yeah, I think that would be really relevant.
Annexed in. Okay. Strikes me as odd that it's all talked about cities and whatnot, but where are the counties fitting into this?
Well, Eric, I thought the counties were required in the urban portions of Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas counties. I thought they were.
Yeah, so I guess I'm talking about the city's implementation of this, obviously. So Multnomah County, Washington County, Clackamas County will be required to adopt their own sort of compliant versions of the code, and there are different things that apply to those sort of urban unincorporated areas. So again, it would be about how we apply this though within the city of Lake Oswego, our own zoning, and when that would sort of kick in. It is the case that perhaps Clackamas County will have different kind of thresholds for what they consider to be a constrained infrastructure area. And I think that's some of the black and white, or I'm sorry, the gray area rather. It's not black and white right now.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions? None? All right, thank you, Eric, for the update.
Thank you.
So next on the agenda is schedule review. Director Siegel, would you like to give us an update on the schedule?
Thanks, Chair Heap. So your next meeting is November 9th. You'll have a draft findings for the Marylhurst rezoning for your action. You also have the first of 2 work sessions scheduled for discussion of 2021 goals. So we did put the query out to the neighborhood associations, the business associations, the chamber, and others in the community for any input that they have for your goals. I think we gave them, was it a November 1st deadline? I'm trying to remember the deadline.
Yeah, I think it was November 1st, correct, Director Siegel.
So we'll compile all the input that's received, addressed to the commission, and have that for your consideration on the 9th. And then on the 26th, we have 2 items. So it'll be the second work session on goal setting. And then we also have a public hearing coming up on temporary dining shelters. And this is really a follow-on to the work that you did earlier in the year, amending the code to allow seasonal dining enclosures. The seasonal enclosures, as you may recall, that proposal was initiated prior to COVID. And the thought was that would be more of an ongoing opportunity or an option that would be available for restaurants during the colder months to have those enclosures over their patios or along the front of a building. The council, in reviewing that proposal and hearing from the public more recently, they were pleased with the work that you did, and they appreciated that. They were also hearing that there's a more urgent need for temporary shelters, and primarily tents over patios or outdoor dining areas, and also for those building owners that are wanting to install a canopy or an awning or some type of attachment to a building that would become a permanent shelter. So they've asked us to bring a proposal to work with the commission and for you to bring a recommendation to the council on amending the code that would allow some relief during COVID, really is what it is, for temporary shelters to be in place for longer than 14 days, which is the current limitation in the code. And of course, doesn't really help restaurants through the winter. So this all came together fairly quickly. We got the direction. I met with the city council at their most recent meeting, and they said we'd like to proceed with this. So we subsequently, actually prior to that, we notified the state that we were going to initiate a code change, and the Planning Commission and Council would conduct public hearings on that, and with the goal of bringing an ordinance to council by the beginning of the year. Now, that of course doesn't help the businesses right now that are needing that shelter. So what the council asked is that we allow for issuance of building permits for awnings in the interim, and that we allow the use of these tents for more than 14 days in the interim as the code amendments are in process. And so if ultimately the code changes are not adopted, and that's not the outcome that we're hoping for, but it's not, there's no guarantees. And if for some reason they're not adopted, tents will have to come down. Property owners who have received permits and have built awnings will have to take them down. So it's not an ideal situation. There's risk on both, the applicant side and on the city side, but we're in a state of emergency really for these businesses. It's an economic crisis, and something like 100,000 restaurants across the country have gone out of business by the end of the summer. And according to the Wall Street Journal, about 60% of all restaurants that have closed down since the beginning of the pandemic are not expected to reopen. And so that's really the background on why we're doing this, and we're trying to be flexible and trying to provide some relief. So anyway, kind of a long explanation for why you have a public hearing on November 23rd, but I wanted you to have that context. And if you were not, otherwise following the city council on this issue, that's why we're working on this. So that's the schedule update. We've got those two items on the 23rd. Yes, Commissioner Pepe.
Wait, your Pepe.
Director Siegel, with what the city council is requesting us to provide to them, is that solely and narrowly for restaurants, or is that for businesses in Lake Oswego?
That's a good question. I was probably overgeneralizing. So the proposal, that there are two parts. The provision for awnings or canopies would be specifically for outdoor dining areas. The proposal for tents, which are temporary structures and not attached to buildings, would be for it really any business that has a need for either outdoor seating or queuing, waiting area, picking up, dropping off, really any function of the business apart from outdoor sales and display. That's not what it's for, at least conceptually. Now the proposal will come to the commission, and you'll have an opportunity to hear from the public and weigh in on it. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions on the schedule? None? All right. As Director Siegel was mentioning, I think our work in November, one of the primary things is going to be, our goals. So I'll be reaching out to the commissioners, but all commissioners, please be thinking about goals that you would like to suggest the commission propose. And so I'll work with you to help put those goals together. And then as Director Siegel was saying, by the end of November, we should have the goals submitted. So please be thinking about, goals you want to suggest, and then submit them to myself and Director Siegel. All right, thank you. So that was the last thing on our agenda tonight. With that, adjourn the meeting. Bye.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye.
Good night,
everybody.
All right.